The story of Othniel, the first deliverer. Before the beginning, there is a name that most people skip over. In the great sweep of biblical narrative, with its kings and prophets, its burning bushes and parted seas, its giants and poets and weeping women, there is a name that appears briefly, does its work, and then disappears into the margin of history. Othniel. Say it slowly. Othniel. In Hebrew, Atniel, Othniel. The name carries weight. It is most likely a compound of two ancient roots, Atni, meaning strength or lion of God, and El, the ancient Semitic word for God. Some translators render it Lion of God. Others, more boldly, He who prevails over God, echoing the very name Israel itself, the one who wrestles with God. That a man whose name means prevailing over the divine should be the first judge of Israel is not an accident. It is a theological announcement. But before we can understand what Othniel means, we must understand what he was born into. We must go back, before the judges, before the chaos, to the last great ordered moment in Israel's early story. We must go back to a man named Caleb, to a city called Hebron, and to a promise made in the wilderness that most of Israel had already forgotten. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Caleb. To understand the first judge, you must first understand his uncle. Caleb ben Jephunneh was a man who did not belong to his generation. He was one of the 12 spies sent by Moses to survey the land of Canaan, and he was one of only 2 men who came back with courage in their report. While 10 spies saw giants and shrank, Caleb saw the same giants and said, "We are well able to overcome it." His exact words, preserved in Numbers 13:30, are terse and electric. "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." For that single sentence, for that refusal to let fear define reality, God made Caleb a promise. He alone, of all the men over 20 years old who had left Egypt, would enter the promised land. He alone would see with his own eyes what he had declared with his own mouth. The 40 years in the wilderness passed. The generation of fear died in the desert. Moses died on the mountain. Joshua led the crossing of the Jordan. And Caleb, now 85 years old, his bones still iron, his eyes still clear, walked up to Joshua and made what is one of the most extraordinary requests in the Hebrew Bible. He asked for the hardest territory, not the valleys, not the rich coastal plains, not the easy land. He asked for Hebron, the hill country where the Anakim lived, the very giants that had terrorized the 10 spies 4 decades earlier. His words in Joshua 14 are magnificent. "Give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out." Note the grammar. It may be that the Lord will be with me. There is something breathtaking here. Even Caleb, the most confident man in his generation, does not presume upon God. He does not demand divine assistance. He offers his body and his will, and he trusts that God will honor what God has promised. He took Hebron. He drove out the 3 sons of Anak, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, names that sounded like thunder to the previous generation, names that had broken 10 men's spirits in a single afternoon. Caleb scattered them. And then the text tells us something precise and purposeful. And from there, he went up against the inhabitants of Debir. Debir, ancient city of books, city of scribes, the city whose very name in Hebrew means the word or the inner sanctuary. This is where Othniel enters history. Chapter 2. The City of the Word Debir. In Joshua 15:15, the city is called Kiryat Sefer, which translates as City of the Book or City of Writing. Some scholars believe it was an ancient Canaanite center of scribal culture, perhaps a place where legal tablets, administrative records, or religious texts were kept. A Bronze Age archive city, a repository of the accumulated knowledge of southern Canaan. Others connect the name to Sofer, the Hebrew word for scribe, and suggest that the city was home to a guild of professional record keepers, men trained in the art of writing when most people in the ancient world were illiterate. Whatever its precise identity, the city of Debir was significant. Caleb knew it. And when he had finished taking Hebron, he turned his attention south and west toward this city of scrolls and stone. But here, the narrative does something unusual. Instead of telling us that Caleb conquered Debir himself, the text pauses. It offers a reward. Caleb, old warrior, fearless strategist, the man who had just routed the sons of Anak, makes a public declaration. He who attacks Kiryat Sefer and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, as wife. This is a custom as old as warfare itself, a prize for valor. The ancient world ran on these transactions. Honor, marriage alliance, family consolidation. A daughter given in marriage was not a dismissal, but a bond. It connected families, created alliances, transferred honor. And so the question hangs in the air over the hill country of Judah. Who will take the city of the word? The answer comes in a single verse. Judges 1:13. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, as wife. That is it. 12 words in English, perhaps slightly more in Hebrew. Othniel captured Debir. We do not know how. We are given no battle account, no strategic detail, no miraculous intervention, just the bare fact of the deed. He came, he fought, he won. And in that compression, the text is teaching us something. Othniel is not a man who needs a legend built around him. His actions speak without decoration. Later judges, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, will require elaborate narratives to contain them. Othniel requires one verse, but that one verse does two things simultaneously. First, it establishes that Othniel is a warrior of the first order, a man capable of taking a fortified city. Second, it places him inside the family of Caleb, the greatest man of his generation. Othniel is not some upstart from an obscure lineage. He is the heir of the tradition of courage. He has been raised in the household of a man who looked at giants and saw possibility. He is, in a sense, Caleb's spiritual successor, the next generation of the spirit that said, "We are well able." Now watch what happens next, because the story that follows the capture of Debir is small, domestic, intimate, seemingly inconsequential, and it is one of the most revealing passages in the entire book of Judges. Chapter 3. The woman who asked for springs. Her name was Achsah, and she refuses to be a footnote. In the ancient world, women in texts were often furniture, present in the narrative but voiceless, moved by the decisions of men without agency or speech. But Achsah has something to say, and the text preserves her words with precision. The passage in Judges 1:14-15 is brief, but let it breathe. When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field, and she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of the Negeb, give me also springs of water." And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. 3 things deserve attention here. First, Achsah takes initiative. The text says she urged Othniel. The Hebrew word is vatasitihu, which some translations render as she persuaded him or she moved him, to ask her father for additional land. She is not passive. She has a mind about what she needs, and she exercises it. She moves her husband. But then, and this is fascinating, she does not send Othniel to ask. She asks herself. She dismounts from her donkey and speaks directly to her father. There is something in the visual poetry of this moment that the camera of the imagination must hold. A young woman, freshly married, getting down from her animal in the presence of her powerful, war-hardened father and making a request. Second, Achsah names what the land lacks. She says something that reveals the mind of a strategist. "You have given me the Negeb." The Negev is dry land, arid land, land that has power as territory but is nearly useless without water. The Negev without springs is inheritance without sustenance. She sees the gap. She names it. She asks for what is needed. "Give me also springs of water." Not ornaments, not jewelry, not prestige. Springs. Water. The thing that makes everything else live. Third, Caleb gives her what she asks for, and more. He gives her both the upper springs and the lower springs. He does not grant half her request. He does not negotiate or minimize. A woman who knows what she needs and asks for it clearly receives abundance. Now, why does this story matter for understanding Othniel? Because the woman he married is not passive. She is strategic, courageous, articulate, and unafraid of powerful men. She knows what a dry inheritance needs. She goes and gets it. The man who marries a woman like Achsah is a man who can recognize strength. A man who follows her counsel to go to Caleb is a man secure enough in himself to be guided. And a man who is secure enough to be guided is paradoxically the kind of man capable of leading others. Othniel is revealed not only by what he conquers, but by whom he loves. But now the domestic scene closes. The springs are given, the field is settled, and time moves. Years pass, perhaps decades. And what happens to a people who have received a gift they did not earn, and who slowly, imperceptibly, forget where the gift came from? Chapter 4. The Forgetting. The book of Judges opens with a sentence that carries the weight of an entire civilization's collapse. "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord." It is the first note of a chord that will be struck 8 times across the book of Judges, the initiating beat of what scholars call the Deuteronomistic cycle. Sin, servitude, supplication, salvation, silence, and then the cycle begins again. But before we hear this chord struck for Othniel's generation, we need to sit with what the forgetting actually looked like. Because the Bible is not vague about it. The precise language of Judges 3:7 is, "The people of Israel forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth." They forgot. The Hebrew verb is shachach, shakha, to forget, to neglect, to let slip from memory. It is not the word for willful rebellion. It is not the word for calculated defiance. It is the word for a slow, accumulated negligence, a gradual drift. The same word used when a man forgets his walking staff, or a mother forgets the child of her womb. What did forgetting look like in practice? It looked like accommodation. it looked like survival. When you settle in a new land surrounded by people whose gods have been worshipped there for centuries, gods tied to the rain and the harvest, gods whose priests know the soil and the seasons, it is not hard to understand the logic of syncretism. The god of the desert, who had guided them through the wilderness, was now the god of a land they were learning to farm. And the Canaanites had farming gods. The Baals, storm and fertility deities. The Asheroth, the wooden poles or sacred trees associated with the goddess Asherah, mistress of the sea, mother of the gods in the Ugaritic pantheon. Mix a little, add a little, cover your bases. This is what forgetting looks like. Not an overnight apostasy, but a gradual blurring, until the line between the God of Abraham and the gods of the hill shrines becomes impossible to see. And the text tells us this: forgetting had a consequence. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. Sold. The Hebrew is makar, the word used for selling goods, selling property, selling people into slavery. It is a blunt economic metaphor for a devastating theological reality. When a people forgets the source of their freedom, freedom becomes a commodity that can be traded away. They are no longer free people. They are merchandise. And now we meet the villain. Chapter 5. Cushan-Rishathaim. Say the name, Cushan-Rishathaim. It is, in the Hebrew text as it stands, one of the most dramatically villainous names in the entire Bible. Cushan, possibly a reference to a dark-skinned people or a geographic identity. Rishathaim, a word built from the Hebrew root resha, meaning wickedness, with the dual suffix ayim, making it double wickedness. Cushan of double wickedness. Cushan the doubly wicked. Scholars have long debated whether this is a genuine proper name or a polemical nickname applied by the Israelite narrator, a contemptuous editorial comment baked into the historical record. We do something similar today. History has a way of encoding its moral judgments into the names it preserves. Whatever his actual name, the king of Mesopotamia, and the precise identification of Aram Naharaim, the Syria of the two rivers, is itself debated. Is it northwestern Mesopotamia, modern-day northern Syria, the region between the Euphrates and the Balik? This king extended his power down into Canaan and brought Israel under his heel for 8 years. 8 years. Think about what 8 years of subjugation feels like. A generation of children who have never known freedom. Tribute extracted from villages that were already marginal. The humiliation of occupation layered over the shame of knowing, at some level, in the way that communal memory works, that this was connected to the choices made at the hilltop shrines. The Israelites had cried out to other gods, and now another king had come. But here is the text's next sentence, and it is one of the most luminous in the book of Judges. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel, who saved them. When the people cried out, the Hebrew word is za'ak, a cry of anguish, of distress, the visceral sound of a people who have run out of options. It is the same word used when the Israelites cried out in Egypt under Pharaoh. It is a cry that comes from the gut before it comes from the mouth. And what is God's response to this cry? He raises up a deliverer. The Hebrew is Yahweh Hekim Lahem Moshia. Literally, the Lord raised up for them a savior. The word Moshia, savior, deliverer, is the same root from which the name Joshua derives, and ultimately the name Yeshua. To the ears of the Hebrew audience, the arrival of a Moshiach in response to an anguished cry was not merely political, it was theological. It echoed every other moment in which Israel had been in the pit and the hand of God had reached in. And whom does God raise up? Chapter 6. The Spirit falls, and the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. 6 words in Hebrew. One of the most important sentences in the book of Judges. This is the moment. This is what separates a judge from a warlord, a deliverer from a conqueror, a man raised by God from a man raised by ambition. The Spirit of God, Ruach Yahweh, the breath, the wind, the animating force of the divine, falls upon Othniel. Notice the verb, vatahi, was upon him, or more literally, became upon him. The Spirit did not drift near him. It descended and remained. The language suggests something total, something that reshapes the man it touches. Ruach Yahweh. The word Ruach is one of the most textured words in all of biblical Hebrew. It means breath. It means wind. It means spirit. It is the word used in Genesis 1:2, when the Spirit of God hovers over the face of the deep. It is the word used when God breathes life into the dust-made Adam. It is the word for what a person loses at the moment of death. To say that the Ruach Yahweh came upon Othniel is to say that the same force that brought the world into being, the same breath that animated the first human, has now entered this man from the hill country of Judah and moved him toward his purpose. What does the Spirit do? The text tells us with remarkable precision, he judged Israel, and he went out to war. 2 actions, judgment and war, justice and force, the internal ordering of a people and the external confrontation of their enemy. This is the full vocation of the judge, not merely the warrior, not merely the magistrate, but the man or woman through whom God simultaneously heals a people and defeats their oppressor. The judges of Israel were not simply military commanders. They were the living embodiment of divine order imposed on human chaos. And for Othniel, these 2 actions, judging and warring, are inseparable. You cannot bring a people out of spiritual chaos while leaving them under political subjugation. And you cannot liberate a people politically while leaving the inner work undone. Othniel does both. The text continues, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand. And then silence. No battle narrative, no dramatic description of strategy, of terrain, of the moment when one army broke against another. Just this. And his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim, the king of double wickedness, the man who had ground Israel under his heel for 8 years, is dispatched in a single sentence. This is intentional. The absence of battle narrative is itself a theological statement. When the Spirit of God comes upon a person, the outcome is not in doubt. The drama is not in the battle. The drama is in the man's willingness to answer the call. Once Othniel rises and goes, once he judges internally and marches externally, the result is predetermined by the one who sent him. Cushan-Rishathaim falls, and then the land rests. Chapter 7. 40 years of peace. And the land had rest 40 years. The land rested. The verb shekat, to be quiet, to be still, to rest, is not the word for the absence of war. It is the word for the presence of peace. It carries with it the sense of shalom, wholeness, rightness, the ordered harmony that the Hebrew imagination saw as the natural condition of a creation tended by its creator. 40 years. In the Bible, 40 is rarely a precise number and always a meaningful one. 40 days and 40 nights of rain, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 days on the mountain. 40 is the number of a full period, a complete season of something. A generation. Israel received a generation of peace under Othniel. Think about what that means in human terms. Children born when he defeated Cushan-Rishathaim grew to adulthood and had children of their own, all under the canopy of a peace purchased by one man's faithfulness. People who had known only the weight of occupation grew old under freedom. Fields were planted and harvested without tribute. Villages were built without fear. Songs were sung that could not have been sung before. 40 years. And at the end of them, the text tells us simply, "Then Othniel the son of Kenaz died." No funeral oration, no lamentation, no elaborate account of his burial or his mourners. Just the death, stated plainly, followed immediately by the next verse. "And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord." The cycle does not wait. Chapter 8. Why Othniel matters. We have reached the end of the account, and it has taken us, in the original text, fewer than 5 verses. 5 verses. Out of these 5 verses, a man receives the designation first deliverer of Israel. He becomes the prototype by which all subsequent judges are measured. He is the control case, the pure example before the variations begin. And the variations will come. They will come spectacularly. Ehud will be a left-handed assassin. Deborah will be a prophetess and judge who shames a general into action by announcing that the glory of the battle will go to a woman. Gideon will reduce his army from 32,000 to 300 and question God at every turn. Jephthah will make a rash vow that destroys his own daughter. Samson will be a man of extraordinary gifts and catastrophic personal failures, who will never quite manage to become the deliverer he was born to be. Each subsequent judge is a deviation from the Othniel pattern in some direction. What is the Othniel pattern? First, he is a man of established character before the crisis arrives. The account of the capture of Debir, the marriage to Aksa, the springs, all of this establishes who Othniel is before God calls him. He is not shaped by the crisis. He brings a shaped character to the crisis. This is foundational. The man who rises to the moment does not become something new in the moment. He reveals what was already there. Courage under pressure is not created by pressure. It is revealed by it. Othniel was already a conqueror. He was already a man who could recognize and honor the wisdom of the woman beside him. He was already embedded in the tradition of Caleb's faithfulness. All of that was already there. Second, he responds to a collective need, not a personal grievance. Every other judge in the book has some personal dimension to their motivation. Gideon's family was slaughtered. Jephthah was exiled. Samson is driven as much by personal vendetta as by national calling. Othniel has no apparent personal grievance against Cushan-Rishathaim. He rises because Israel cried out. He answers a communal call. Third, he does not negotiate with the Spirit. The text does not record Othniel asking for signs, requesting confirmation, expressing doubt, or seeking reassurance. The Spirit comes. Othniel moves. There is a directness, a simplicity to his faithfulness that the later judges conspicuously lack. Fourth, he combines justice and force. He judges and he fights. This double action, the inner work and the outer work, is what makes his deliverance complete. He does not merely win a battle, he reconstitutes a people. Fifth, he leaves behind peace, not merely the absence of war. 40 years of shekat, rest, wholeness is his legacy. Not a mere ceasefire, a genuine peace, a generation. Chapter 9. The Archaeology of a Forgotten Man. Here is an honest question worth sitting with. Why do we know so little about Othniel? The biblical text gives us almost nothing. There is no legend built around him, no psalm attributed to him, no prophetic reference that looks back on his memory. He has no devoted cult of remembrance. He is not listed in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, though Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah are, three of whom are considerably more morally complicated than Othniel. Why does the man who does everything right get so few words? One answer is literary. Othniel functions as the template, not the story. He is the grammar that makes the subsequent stories legible. You do not tell the story of grammar. You use grammar to tell other stories. Another answer is theological. His very lack of complexity is his testimony. The Deuteronomistic historians who compiled the Book of Judges were writing a theological argument, not merely a historical chronicle. Their argument is that Israel's fate is tied to Israel's faithfulness. Othniel is the proof of the positive case. When a people cries out in genuine repentance, and when God raises up a person of genuine character, the result is deliverance and peace. He is the thesis statement, stated cleanly and completely, before the complications begin. A third answer is the one that is perhaps hardest to hear. Faithfulness is quiet. The man who does what he was called to do, in the way he was called to do it, without drama, without digression, without crisis of faith, leaves behind fewer stories because he generates fewer wounds. Othniel's life produces no scandal, no tragedy, no cautionary tale. He simply answers the call, does the work, and keeps the peace until he dies. And then the people forget again. But notice, the forgetting after Othniel is not his failure. It is Israel's. The judge cannot indefinitely substitute for the inner transformation of a people. He can win the battle. He can establish the peace. He can judge with justice and fight with courage. But he cannot make a people remember what they do not choose to remember. This is the tragedy embedded in the structure of the Book of Judges itself. Every deliverer is a temporary solution to a permanent problem. The permanent problem is not any foreign king. The permanent problem is the human tendency toward forgetfulness, toward the slow erosion of gratitude, toward the comfortable drift away from the source of life, toward the comfortable substitutes the world offers. Othniel defeats Cushan Rishathaim, but he cannot defeat the pull of the Baals. No judge can. The Book of Judges will spend 13 chapters exploring the many creative ways that God nevertheless continues to raise up deliverers, each one more irregular, more complicated, more human in their flaws. Because even in the midst of a people who keep forgetting, God keeps responding to the cry. Chapter 10. The Kenizzite Question. There is a question hiding in the genealogy of Othniel that most people glide past, but which, if you stop and look at it, opens into something profound. Othniel is described as the son of Kenaz, and Caleb, his uncle, his father-in-law, is elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible described not simply as a Judahite, but as a Kenizzite. Numbers 32:12. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite. The Kenizzites are mentioned in Genesis 15:19 as one of the 10 Canaanite nations whose land God promised to Abraham. They appear not as Israelites, but as Canaanites, indigenous inhabitants of the land. How then is Caleb, a Kenizzite, counted among the tribes of Judah? How does his nephew Othniel become the first judge of a people he may not have been ethnically born into? The most probable explanation, supported by the trajectory of the text, is that the Kenizzites, or at least this branch of them, had assimilated into Judah, perhaps during the sojourn in Egypt, perhaps during the wilderness period. Caleb is counted among Judah. He is sent as Judah's spy. He receives his inheritance within Judah's territory. And when the lists of Judahite genealogy are compiled, Kenaz appears as the name of a grandson of Judah, 1 Chronicles 4:15. But the ambiguity remains, and it is worth honoring rather than smoothing over. Because if Othniel carries Kenizzite blood, if the first judge of Israel was, in some measure, a man of Canaanite origin who had been grafted into the covenant people, then his story says something remarkable about the nature of God's choosing. God does not choose the deliverer by blood alone. He chooses the deliverer by character, by faithfulness, by the Ruach, the spirit that a person carries. The man who captures the city of the word is perhaps the man who was not born to the story, but who chose to live inside it. The man who delivers Israel from foreign oppression is himself, in some sense, a former foreigner. There is a theological resonance here that the Hebrew imagination, which was never naive about the complexity of Israelite ethnicity, would have heard. Ruth was a Moabitess. Rahab was a Canaanite. Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, was a Midianite priest. And again, the biblical narrative returns to this. The covenant was never a pure ethnicity. It was always a call, and people from unexpected places have always been capable of answering it. Chapter 11. The Pattern and the Promise. We have arrived at the end of what the text gives us about Othniel, and yet the more carefully you look at what little is given, the more you find. His life is not a cautionary tale. It is not a tragedy. It is not a complicated moral exercise. It is something rarer and, in its own way, harder to write about. It is a life of simple, complete faithfulness. He was born into a tradition of courage, Caleb's household, where the impossible was treated as probable because God had said it was possible. He conquered a city of words, and in doing so, became a man who understood that some things must be taken before they can be given. He married a woman of wisdom, a woman who looked at dry land and saw what it needed, and asked for it, and received it. And by marrying such a woman, he revealed his own depth. He was raised up in a time of darkness, not because he was perfect, not because he was spectacular, but because when the Spirit of God fell on a person of formed character, the result is action, and the action is effective. He judged and he fought. He ordered a people and he defeated their enemy. He held both dimensions of the vocation together without flinching. He gave Israel 40 years of rest, and then he died, and the people forgot. The forgetting is not the last word, because the structure of the book of Judges tells us that it never is. The cycle turns: sin, servitude, cry, deliverance, and every time the people cry out, God responds. Every time, without exception. Even when the judge is deeply flawed, even when the deliverer is improbable, even when the means of salvation seem absurd. What Othniel establishes is the minimum, that when a people genuinely cries out, and when God raises up someone who answers the call in full, the result is peace. What the rest of Judges explores is the infinite variations, the ways God works through broken people, through reluctant people, through angry people, through people who cannot manage their own lives even while they change the lives of others. Othniel is the North Star of the Book of Judges, the point from which every other trajectory departs, the man who did it right so that we could understand, as we watch the others do it imperfectly, what right actually looks like. He is the first deliverer. He is the man who prevailed. And somewhere in the long history of a people who kept forgetting and kept crying out and kept being answered, somewhere in that history, Othniel's name is still being spoken, still being honored. Not loudly, not with the dramatic remembrance given to Samson or Gideon, but with something better than noise, with the quiet, enduring testimony of a life that did what it was called to do. Epilogue, the first note of a long song. The Book of Judges is a long, complicated, often painful song. It will take us through Ehud and Deborah, through Gideon's fleece and Jephthah's vow, through the tragedy of Abimelech, through the forgotten judges whose names are preserved but whose stories are lost, through the heartbreak of Samson, a man who was meant to begin the deliverance of Israel and never finished what he started. And all of it is set against the memory of this first verse. And the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. Every subsequent judge is measured against the moment when a man named Othniel, son of Kenaz, nephew and son-in-law of Caleb, rose up in the power of God's breath and gave his people 40 years of peace. Every failure is a departure from that pattern. Every partial success is a reflection of it. And every cry that rises from a people in darkness, every za'ak, every gut-level anguish, is heard by the same God who heard it the first time. The first note of the song has been sung. The melody is set. What remains is the long unfolding of a people learning, again and again, that the only way to keep what they have been given is to remember the one who gave it. Then the land had rest 40 years, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the man who prevailed, rests in it.